Hi, everybody. Welcome to the This Is Not Therapy Hour. Back after a short break of a couple of weeks. My name is Marie. I'm a coach with Effective Artistry, and I'm joined as ever by Brandon Tessers, LCPC and Clinical Director of Effective Artistry. A little bit about the practice. It's a neurodiversity affirming coaching and therapy practice based in Northbrook, Illinois, where the therapists are licensed to work with anyone in the state of Illinois, and the coaches work remotely and can work from anywhere in the world. Good to be back with you, Brendan. How are you doing?
Good. It's good to be back with you. I apologize. Like many neurodivergent people, I struggle to listen to my body. I talk about it as deprioritized interoception, and did not eat or drink anything before this, and so we'll be eating and drinking during this. So I apologize if that is bothersome to anyone, and if so, let me know, and I can mute and things like that if the audio is causing any problems.
Sounds good. I forgot to eat lunch today, so I remembered about an hour ago, so 6 p.m. here.
There have been many times in the past where I've forgotten before the stream, and I always have just delayed it, and then I have 2 sessions back to, so I then wouldn't eat anything until 4:30, and then get headachy. I'm trying to make a conscious effort to like prioritize responding to those, basic needs and whatever.
Yeah.
So still working on it. Would have been better if I'd done it before the stream, but this is better than before.
Don't worry. Get yourself comfortable. I'm living on iced coffee at the moment. It's kind of warm here, so I'll be sipping away as well, but I'll try not to make too much noise. If you're joining us in the chat on Twitch or Facebook or YouTube Live, this is not therapy, as the title would suggest. It's an open conversation, so it's a chance for you to ask questions of Brandon or share your thoughts on any of the topics that come up. We usually talk about things related to neurodiversity and mental health, but the conversation can go anywhere you'd like it to go. But that's the general area. So I don't have a bunch of questions to put to you today, Brandon, but one thing that has come up for me is the topic of decision making, or decision fatigue, or decision paralysis and overwhelm, and how that might affect people who identify as neurodivergent, or how your neurodivergent identity might inform or affect your decision-making process.
Yeah. Awesome. I love that topic. There was a time a couple years back where I actually was like trying to come up with worksheets and things, and was very focused on decision-making worksheets, because there's a lot of stuff there, and I'm excited to talk about it. I guess is the short version of everything I was about to say.
All right. Well, I'm not sure where to start, so I thought I'd start with an example from my own life. We'll say I get overwhelmed and I get stuck in decision making when I'm trying to clean house. So maybe I've got a bunch of clothes that I don't know what to do with. They're old, they need mending. So I'll look at them and I'll go, okay, I could set them aside for later and maybe take a needle and thread to them. Truthfully, I'm not going to do that. Another part of me will say, well, I could take them to a charity shop, but then I'm just offloading hand-me-downs that are maybe not worth selling to a charity shop and giving them my rubbish to deal with. But the social conscience keeps saying, no, you shouldn't throw these things out. You should try and upcycle them or mend them and get more wear out of them. So ultimately what ends up happening is they get stuck in a bag, and the bag gets stuck in the wardrobe. And 6 months later, I'll find them and I'll go through the whole process again, and they'll go back in the wardrobe. And it's because I start overthinking what I should do next. And it looks to somebody else, it looks like a really simple set of steps. Get them out of your house. You don't need them. Get them out of your house. But I get stuck on the where and the how and the why. So that's maybe one example.
Yeah.
From my own experience.
That's great. I like that example. And and that's going to be the best way. I mean, I think that's the best way to talk about anything, is to talk about real examples from our real lives, because we have information about it instead of it being hypothetical. But decision making is a term that covers a lot of different stuff. And so the best way to approach different pieces of it is going to be just, so this kind of decision making you're talking about, as opposed to something where it's like, I have to decide, which school I want to go to, or I just got an unexpected, $2,000 and I have to decide what I want to do with it or whatever. Mm-hmm. The type of decision making you're experiencing right now, I think, would fall under a lot of what people would just call like planning, right? Like coming up with the plan that you need to then execute. I know I want to clean out these clothes. How exactly do I want to go about doing that? So we're like operationalizing the intention of cleaning them out. What's the actionable step by step? And yes, it is a place that neurodivergent people tend to get stuck. So I like to use a couple different terms when talking about this stuff. One is efficiency. And when we're talking about efficiency, we're talking about the maximum, return on investment, the value gotten per cost spent. So making a plan take less effort or less time or whatever, while retaining the same value, makes it more efficient. Or coming up with ways to get more value without increasing the cost, or increasing the value more than you're increasing, right? Efficiency is per resource spent, the value that you get. You're trying to maximize the value per the resource. The other term that I think matters here is expediency, which is just a reference to what can be done right now. What is expedient kind of almost means what is convenient, what can happen now. To me, effectiveness, being effective, that word means a lot to me. That's why it's in effective artistry, is the theoretical optimal balancing point between efficiency and expediency. That you're trying to be as efficient as possible while also being expedient so that something actually happens. If you're focused, and neurodivergent people tend to be, if your primary focus is on being as efficient as possible, getting the maximum value out of the minimum cost, well, that incentivizes doing a lot of thinking before you do anything, because thinking, even though it has a cost in and of itself, thinking about things is a much lower cost generally than actually engaging in like starting to mend them or taking the clothes to drop them off somewhere, which is going to take more time and energy than it takes to just consider, should I do this or should I do that?
Yeah.
So we have a tendency to think and want to come up with the most efficient plan. And people will think about this in different ways. We'll call it overthinking or perfectionism, or we can say, like, one way of phrasing it that people tend to respond to is, it's like, I don't want to do anything until I know that the plan I've come up with is going to work, right? Like, until I'm sure that college is the college I want to go to, until I'm sure that that job is the job that I want, I'm not going to do anything about it. And there's advantage to that. And it's even like little micro decisions. Like for me, I know that I'll catch myself if there's something down on the floor that I need to reach down and grab. I'll quickly kind of think like, is there anything else down on the floor that I need to grab? Can I just stay bent over and grab a few things before standing back? Uh-oh. You still there?
Yep.
Oh, just another one of my things had a timer on it and popped up. Okay. Or I'll drop a thing and be like, oh, I'll pick that up later. Or leaving things at the bottom of a set of stairs or at the top so that like the next time, big decisions, little decisions, we want to make sure that we're not wasting our efforts.
Yeah. Problem
is that thinking in order to come up with a more efficient plan also involves spending effort. So this is my like ridiculous math way of thinking about all this. But in any given situation, there is theoretically a point at which you have invested as much as you can invest in terms of coming up with the most efficient plan, and going any further in trying to come up with a more efficient plan now makes the whole thing less efficient because of how much resources you're spending on coming up with that plan. And that's all theoretical and philosophical and not super actionable. We can do more actionable stuff, but I think I like to give that groundwork of what it is we're trying to do. We're just trying trying to come up with the best idea. And until we're solid or confident that we have, let's put it off, because I can always come up with, if I haven't done it yet and I come up with a better idea later, I can still do it. But if I've donated them and I come up with a better idea later, I can't go get them back.
I feel like if you're coming to the realization that you're neurodivergent later in life, all these decisions, big or small, start to acquire a lot of weight suddenly, because you're seeing everything in a new light, through the light of being neurodivergent, and you go through that process of questioning everything that ever happened before, on every decision you make, especially if you've gone through, I guess, difficulties with jobs or college or whatever, and you feel like there's a lot more pressure to get it right now that you're a bit older and a bit wiser. And so it can be great to have that realization and to understand a bit more about yourself, but also decision making can become even more challenging. Am I making sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And this is one of those places where I've mentioned a bunch recently, that people who use neurodiversity language but are really just talking about the medical model, this is one of those places where it causes a problem. Because if I'm identifying neurodivergent to just mean, diagnosed or diagnosable with one of some set of disorders or whatever, then that, when I start to think and feel that way, that starts to incentivize me to think about everything I'm doing and add this new question of, is this normal, or is this because I'm neurodivergent?
Yeah.
And mostly that question doesn't matter. Mostly. It has utility in some cases, which is why we start to ask it in a lot of cases, because we found times where it's like, it brings us relief to say, oh, that's why I do it that way, or that's why I have that experience, because I'm neurodivergent.
Yeah.
But when we're thinking about, like, what should I do about cleaning my house or getting rid of these clothes or whatever, it's not always useful to add this step of, like, do I do it the way a normal person does it? How do normal people clean their houses?
Yeah.
It's not very useful. You can't really find, like, how do you answer that question, how a normal person cleans their house? And even if you do, what are you going to do about that then? Like, unless what you're looking for is, I'm looking for some method that might be helpful to me, and I can try it. And if it doesn't work for me, then I'll try something else, which that's always great,
Mm-hmm.
But as opposed to normal and neurodivergent, I think that's more useful if you just say, what's the most common way, or what's some generic advice, or what are the people that I know, what do they do? Start with something very commonly used. And if it doesn't work, then you start getting out into stuff that's more and more rare or individualized or whatever. The simplest answer that works is the best one. So yeah, when we think, oh, being neurodivergent means you have a brain that is structured in a certain kind of a way as opposed to most people's brains, it just incentivizes us to start spending some of our time and energy exploring questions that we can't answer and that don't really have any utility. Like, is this the way a normal do normal people struggle to make decisions in the way that I do? Which they might not, but whether they do or not doesn't assist you in making the decision. It's just adding more work that doesn't help you with what you're trying to do.
Trying to figure out what career path to take.
Mm-hmm.
I think this is one where people commonly get stuck. Maybe they've tried a bunch of different ones before, like I have ADHD, and I think that has contributed, at least in part, to my bouncing around from one area of interest to another. And when things don't work out and you attribute it to, as you say, being neurodivergent, then you start to lose confidence in yourself a little bit. And then maybe lose confidence in the decision-making process or your ability to make good choices. I'm going to use a lot of air quotes there.
That's deficiency model, right? Medical model. I can't make good decisions because I'm neurodivergent.
Yeah. Or what is it that everybody else knows that I don't know? Why am I on the outside looking in? Everybody else seems to have a secret language that enables them to do A, B, C, X, Y, D. Why can't I make a simple choice?
Anything which can eventually, like, basically mean other people don't seem to have struggles and I do. How do I become like them and therefore have no struggles? that's not a thing.
Yeah.
That's the problem with the medical model, is not just that it's that people are told they're deficient, is that other people are told that they're not, and that if you're not deficient in some way, you therefore shouldn't struggle because you're normal and healthy and et cetera, et cetera. So those people also struggle and suffer under that model because they get something wrong or something doesn't go the way they want. And they say, well, what's wrong with me? I know I should be able to X, Y, and Z. And especially most people who start to explore neurodivergence later in life, until the point where they start exploring that, have had this experience I'm talking about, where they're saying, there's nothing wrong with me. I should be able to X. I should be able to Y. What's wrong? And I'm exploring it in like a character or moral way, like I'm lazy, I'm bad, I don't care enough. And then the neurodivergence comes in and says, no, I'm just biologically deficient, which is. Now, in the case of like career, it can be very useful to think, what are careers that appeal to neurodivergent people? In the same way that it is useful to think about that with any identity label that applies to you. All you're really saying is, okay, I want to find something that will be enjoyable to me. Let me identify elements of things about who I am and look at other people who share those elements and see what they've enjoyed and what they've struggled with, because that might help me get some sense, like if I say, well, I like board games. What kind of careers appeal to people who like board games? That can be useful. Theoretically, I have some things in common with other people who also like board games, and I can't know that those particular things affect why they like this job or that job. But the more I have in common with someone else, the more helpful it is for me to think, what do they like, as a way to start exploring what I might like. So thinking about neurodivergence in that sense is great. Just don't think of it in the sense of I only qualify for, or I'm only capable of, or as though it restricts your options.
Yeah.
Neurodivergent people can do anything that non-neurodivergent people can do, because there isn't such a thing as non-neurodivergent people. It doesn't mean, I should clarify, because that's some problematic phrasing. An individual person cannot do anything, right? You can do anything you want is not true of a given individual. It is true of a blank slate human, generically speaking, that an individual human can theoretically do anything that any human can do. Each individual human, though, you have specific things about you. I have specific things about me that dictate what it's going to cost me to do this versus what it will cost me to do that. So I don't mean to say you can do anything you want to do. The label of being neurodivergent is not one that restricts your ability to do something. So it can be useful to take that into account. Just don't think of it as my brain is broken or structured in some deficient way compared to everybody else's.
Right. One thing I've noticed, and I think we've talked about it before, is that sometimes there's a tendency, not just with me, but with other neurodivergent people, to worry too much about what others are thinking about us and our behavior and our values and our goals, and not enough worrying about how we're feeling ourselves.
Yeah.
It adds an extra layer of pressure to the decision-making process. Would X, Y, or Z approve of this?
I would reframe some of that. I agree with what you're saying, but just to be very precise in what I mean when I say things like that is specifically what people tend to undervalue is their own enjoyment.
Yeah.
Because if you're saying just, like linguistically, whatever, it technically can't be true to say, I don't care enough about what I want, because whatever you're caring about, even if it is how other people perceive you, that's what you care about and therefore what you want.
Yeah.
But a specific thing that does get overlooked a lot is, what do I enjoy? What feels good or enjoyable to me? What feels difficult or painful to me? Because caring about what other people think of me and what they want from me and how I impact them, and that's A, valid to think about, and B, impossible not to think about.
Yeah.
There is no way to not think about how anybody else would think or be affected by something. If for no other reason, a ridiculous way of proving the point, but if for no other reason, because even your thoughts happen through language that was taught to you by other people. Try and think a thought without using any word that somebody else came up with, right? Like what we think other people experience, desire, care about, whatever, it's factored into our decision making in a process in a way that we can't extract.
Mm-hmm.
So that's another one of those things where it's like, oh, neurotypicals, they don't care what other people want. No, they do. They might have a different idea about what it is, or they might be paying attention to different people or interpreting things in different ways. But you have to care about what other people, even if you're a jerk, right? All those assholes with all the power that don't give a crap about anyone else's experience. Well, they're still going to care that other people are intimidated by them or fearful of them or aware of their power or whatever, because if no one was, then no one would do anything that they want. It's not a survival strategy that works for humans. Which is just my roundabout way of saying, don't judge yourself for wanting what you want, whether it's because of how other people are impacted by it or not. If what you're doing is not something you like, and you want to change it, or you think it's not worth it, or you want to do more of something else, then yeah, let's look at how to make those changes. But chalking it up to, I care too much about what other people think, that's just another way of saying I'm the problem. I care too much about what people think, without investigating, well, why do the other people around me want me to do these things? Or why do I interpret them that they want me to do whatever? Don't take it all on yourself. But yeah, pay attention to what you like. In terms of career decisions, when people talk about what am I good at, which is in our culture what people mostly tend to focus on when they're talking about careers, when you say, what do you want to do? They say, well, I'm really good at X, or what would you be well suited to, or whatever. That's a really, good and bad, they're useful linguistic shorthands. This is a place where it's not very useful. Because what do we mean by good at? Like, I'm good at math, I'm bad at math. What does that actually mean? If I'm theoretically good at math, but I hate doing it, and this person's theoretically bad at math, but they enjoy it, which of the two of us is going to find more success in a field that involves doing a lot of math? Which of the two of us is going to accomplish more over the course of our life and the course of our career? If you're thinking in terms of career, saying, what am I good at? Literally should just be, what do I enjoy doing the most?
Yeah.
Because that's what you will be able to do the most for the longest. You'll accomplish things and be sustainable and grow. Neurodivergent people, especially people who are identified later in life, tend to have a pattern of, well, I'm good at this because I pick things up quick. So I do that a bunch and everybody thinks it's super valuable. So I'm going to do that and get a lot of value out of it, but I don't enjoy it. So then I kind of burn out. And then I do some other stuff and I find something else that I pick up quickly and I'm good at and that people find valuable. And I do that for a while, but I don't like that either. So I burn out and I just hop around different places. Where like some people work the same job at the same place for 40 years and retire and they enjoy it. That seems ridiculous to me. I can't imagine that.
Yeah.
But it's really just based around building a life that is enjoyable and sustainable for you so that you can show up and do the same thing tomorrow that you're doing today instead of trying to figure out how to be most efficient. Because even in your example, part of what you're factoring into trying to figure out the most efficient path is, well, I know I'm not going to follow through on this later. So I got to come up with a plan where I can just do it all right now. Otherwise, it's not get done. And then anything that we're trying to do that just can't really be done all in one moment tends to be, I'll come back to that when I can figure out how to do it all at once.
And that's still a decision. Deciding to put something off is still making a decision.
Yeah, well,
not the optimal one.
Some versions of talking about decision making involve a lot of like philosophical discussion about what is choice and what is free will and whatever.
Yeah.
And that kind of goes down that path. And I would, from a practical perspective, I would say, just because you do something doesn't mean you decided to do that thing.
Okay.
Because otherwise people go in trouble with like, why do I keep choosing to fail? Why do I, like.
That's true, yeah.
It's the whole idea of the subconscious that, sure, consciously you want this thing, but it keeps going this other way. So subconsciously you want it the other way, which is not a thing that can even theoretically be true. Desire is a conscious experience. There's no such thing as desire that isn't conscious.
Mm-hmm.
If it were, how would that sneaky other part of your brain, the subconscious part, why does it get to overrule your conscious desire?
Have you just upended psychoanalysis?
This is something I've been working on I talked about for a long time, because that's not what Freud really was talking about when he introduced concepts. This is like and Freud himself has criticisms of his younger work and his older age and whatever, because we develop and we evolve. He came up with some ideas that were interesting and helpful to him and to others, and then Jung and his disciple took some and changed it. We build on stuff. We put out the best we can come up with. But this pop psychology idea that anything that happens in your life is a thing you chose. You have total control. Just choose to be happy. You're in control of your emotions. You're in control of your actions. It's not true. Like, choose to never go to sleep. You have a finite ability to do that. You can put it off to a certain extent, and it gets harder and harder and harder, and eventually it happens whether you choose it or not. Choose not to use the bathroom. Choose not to eat. And I know these are ridiculous examples, but we could say the same thing about choose not to feel sad. Choose not to feel tired. Choose not to feel angry. You have a limited ability to do that. But given the context and as things change, it gets harder and harder until eventually you cannot override everything that happens to you by just thinking about it enough. And part of what neurodivergent people tend to struggle with is we have really bought this messaging by and large from our culture that if you think the right way, then everything you want will happen.
Yeah.
And so you spend all this effort just trying to think the right way. Let me care more. Let me want this better. Let me come up with a better plan of what to do. I should try and upcycle these things. Let me come up with, and we just think and we think and we think. The resources required to think are not exactly the same as the resources required to act on anything, but some of them overlap. The more you're thinking, the less you're doing stuff. And the more you're doing stuff, the less you're thinking. One isn't better than the other. You just want the right balance, and that balance changes based on what it is you're trying to do and the context in which you're trying to do it. There are no rules that you can learn, which is what neurodivergent people really want.
Yes.
We want to find the rules that say this is exactly how to go about this thing so that it will never be a problem ever again. You'll never fail. You'll never struggle. How do I make sure I never accidentally get dehydrated? I never get tired. I never accidentally hurt somebody I care about. Those rules don't exist. There are things you can do to make it less frequent, and there are things you can do to address it, notice it, fix it better, faster when it does happen. But there are no secret rules that neurotypical people know and we don't about how to interpret everyone correctly all the time, as though neurotypical people never miscommunicate with one another. I do think that's part of the struggle, is when you believe those rules exist.
Yeah.
You don't know them. I can definitively say you don't know them because they don't exist. So I know you don't know them, but you think they do. So you think you're deficient for not knowing them and that other people do. And it incentivizes you to spend all of your time and energy trying to figure them out instead of just saying, well, there's not a rule here. We just got to try something and see what happens.
So.
Yeah.
I feel like it comes back to communication. You don't know the rules, but you feel like there are rules. Like, say, a job application.
Right.
And the job lists XYZ criteria. And you have like 4 out of the 5. And you think, well, I can't apply for that job. I've only got 4 out of the 5.
Mm-hmm. There have been studies done on that particular thing. Men are much more likely to apply for a job for which they don't meet all the qualifications than women are. And people get hired for jobs where they don't meet all the qualifications all the time, but proportionately, obviously, that's going to be men getting hired beyond their qualifications more frequently than women, in part because they apply for them more frequently than women do. This is part of where that overlap between a lot of, when we're talking about late identified neurodivergent people, especially over the past few years, culturally speaking, we're predominantly talking about women.
Yeah.
A lot more women than men. And this is anecdotal. I don't have like good research data, but just my experience of being someone who talks in these circles and does this work and whatever. A lot more women than men thinking, maybe I'm ADHD, maybe I'm autistic lately.
Mm-hmm.
because women have been taught about rules in a different way that men have. Men are socialized in our culture to not care about the rule. Like, look at all the like billionaire, the guys that get worshipped in our culture as hardworking geniuses. Look how they break the rules and they break the mold and they reshape the game and whatever. That's what you're supposed to strive to do. Where women who get upheld as virtues and paragons of womanhood in our culture are like, look at how much they excelled in following the rules.
Yes. Yeah. Compliance is a virtue. Yeah.
Right. And it's not just people being malicious, and part of it has to do with men are taught in ways that are harmful to men themselves, also are taught not to pay attention to what you're not supposed to care what other people think, and you're not supposed to care what other people want. If you do, you're a wussy, or whatever terrible words we come up with that mostly just have to do with being feminine or like a girl in some way. It's just nobody knows. Nobody knows what they're doing. So it's worth thinking about things and getting opinions and doing research to get some starting point, right? Like, if you're tired all the time, it's worth looking at how much do people generally sleep? Not as in how much do normal people sleep, and I'm not a normal person.
Yeah.
But statistical average, which is the only thing that research can do, what do people tend to do best with sleep-wise? 8 hours a night. Great. Does that mean any given individual sleeps exactly 8 hours a night? No, of course not. It can't. Like, even the most routine and rigid person doesn't sleep exactly that long to the millisecond every single night. It's just an average that's useful. Well, when I look at that, if I'm already sleeping 8 hours a night, but I'm feeling tired, then if I think that that's a rule, that if you sleep 8 hours a night, you won't be tired, which it's not. But if I think that it is, then I'm going to say, oh no, what's wrong with me? I'm broken because I shouldn't be tired, but I am. This has to be in my head, or I'm doing something wrong or whatever. But if I'm tired and I'm trying to change it, and I look at that and I say, oh, well, I only sleep 6 hours a night. That's more than I do. I should try that. Great. It gave you an idea of something to try, because that's what works for most people. And if you try it and you sleep 8 hours a night and it feels better, cool, that was useful. And that happens most of the time. That's why it's statistical average. But if you don't, if, for example, you can't get yourself to sleep for 8 hours a night, and therefore it doesn't solve your problem, that doesn't mean that it theoretically would if only you could get yourself to do it. Being able to do it is part of what needs to happen in order for it to succeed. Find something else. Or sometimes you're sleeping 8 hours and you're still tired, and maybe you need more, or maybe there are other variables and other factors going on. So you just got to do your best to balance getting other people's opinions, learning about other people's experiences, what they think would work, what their advice is. But then also you got to just try stuff, knowing that you don't know how it's going to go.
Mm-hmm.
That's a lot of, when it comes to decision making, what college do I go to kind of decision making. That's a lot of what it is just kind of having to set contingency plans, for example. Okay, I'm going to try this, but if it goes bad in this way that I'm worried that it might, then I will do this and this and this. That makes it easier to get going.
Yeah, have a backup, have a plan B.
Try
Make lists. I know a lot of people are averse to making lists, but they can help.
They can. I mean, this is a separate thing, and I don't necessarily want to take us off on this, but making lists serves three purposes. Theoretically, potentially can serve one or more of three different purposes that are very different things. And when people don't talk about that, again, it just gets talked about as though it's a solution. If you make a list, you won't struggle anymore.
Yeah.
So I make a list, but I still struggle, so it didn't work. Almost everyone with ADHD will say, nothing has worked, right? I've tried different strategies and whatever, and nothing has worked. The reality is more nuanced that, I tried this thing and it worked really well for 2 weeks, but then it stopped. Or I tried this thing and that worked really great for this particular subset of things that I was trying, but didn't help with the other stuff. But because we think of it in this binary rules solve problems forever way, if it worked for a while and then stopped, that means it didn't work. If it works for some things but not others, that means it didn't work. So I just keep trying new things over and over instead of saying, well, I got something that works for this. Now let me add another piece. And again, if you're tired all the time, which if you're neurodivergent, you probably would agree with the statement, I am tired to some extent all of the time. What's the likelihood that you're going to find some one thing that you can do that now you're never tired again?
That's pretty slim, right?
So I try it, I'm still tired, I throw it away. I try a different thing, I'm still tired, I throw it away. Instead of looking at it as, oh, I'm a little less tired than I was before. Still tired, but a little less. So maybe it's worth keeping this one and now finding another thing to add on top.
Yeah.
Big change happens incrementally with consistency, and a lot of neurodivergent people, that's not we need to fix it and solve it all at once. So
that's the striving for efficiency,
right,
not being effective.
Which, by the way, usually makes us very well suited for the kinds of tasks where thinking about something a lot and coming up with one really effective way to fix or change or do whatever you're trying to do in a short span of time, we tend to be really good at that stuff.
We're optimizers.
Yeah. I mean, it overlaps a lot with what we call intelligent. And again, particular kinds of neurodivergence, specifically, we're talking about people who come to that realization or exploration later in life. In those cases, almost always it tends to be people who will say things like, yeah, I always struggled in school with actually like doing the work and taking notes and stuff, but I was really good at the tests, so I got by. Or I relied on my raw intelligence, or I charmed the teachers and people just liked me, or some version of, yes, I did succeed, which is why I didn't get identified as neurodivergent earlier, but in a way that is different than what I'm told was the way that you're supposed to succeed, which is why I'm still exploring it now. There's a reason there's a lot of former gifted kid syndrome, whatever, discussions that overlap with a lot of neurodiversity discussions.
Yeah.
And,
I guess we hit burnout. We all tend to hit burnout at that stage in life where we're suddenly realizing, oh, maybe I'm autistic. Maybe I have ADHD.
yeah,
Like it
burnout,
sometimes takes burnout for us to recognize that there might be something else going on.
which is true and sucks that it comes to that, and is not a binary state. And I know that nobody actually thinks that it is, even though we talk about it like it is. But I do think that how we talk about things matters. There's a reason that people's pronouns matter, right? Like the language we use does impact how we think and how we interact with things. I said before, choose not to sleep. And effectively, burnout, I'm way oversimplifying, but burnout is when you're choosing not to sleep until you can't anymore.
Mm.
When we're talking about burnout as though it is a thing that you were out of and now came into, we're talking about that like threshold between I was able to choose to keep pushing myself, and then I hit a point at which I am no longer able to choose it. My body cannot do it no matter how much I am willing myself to do it.
Yeah.
It just tends to be that we're talking about things that we think of as mental or emotional or whatever, cognitive, intellectual things, as opposed to like no one would ever say you ran as far as you could until you collapsed. You're in burnout. Because everybody knows that there's a limit to what you can do and you have to take breaks and rest and build up to be sustainable. It's just when we talk about the stuff that happens in here that all of a sudden in our culture, we talk about it like it's magic. Of course, you should be able to go to school all day, which is theoretically very draining and intensive, and then come home and immediately do all of your homework. Where no one would say, of course.
Throw in a couple of after school activities as well.
They would never say, of course, you can work in the mines all day and then come home and then immediately start digging in your garden. Why would you want a break? What's wrong with you? Why are you procrastinating? We say, no, come home, relax. If you do need to dig in your garden, do it later after you've had a chance to recover a bit. Mm-hmm. But with this stuff, we think it's magic that if you think the right way, I mean, how many podcasts and books and whatever are out there that are just like, if you get your mindset right, then everything will work out exactly like you want it. Literally, the secret is like all about that. Set your intention and things will happen that way. We love that stuff in our culture.
So we've got about 15 minutes left. So thinking about decision making, that comes under executive functioning skills, right?
Yeah, I mean, executive functioning, as it's generally talked about, like a finite subset of skills, typically decision making or prioritizing or initiating. There's going to be, everyone has different ways of talking about it, but it'll be talked about over there. The way that I talk about executive functioning, that we talk about executive functioning, really what we're exploring more when we talk about decision making, it's like when you said earlier, I've bounced around between a lot of things in my life. Maybe that's in part because I have ADHD, where I would say, no, the fact that you've bounced around in your life a lot probably is evidence that leads to the conclusion that you may have ADHD. The ADHD doesn't cause the bouncing around. The bouncing around is evidence that you might have ADHD as a label that applies to people who have a certain pattern of experiences, right? So decision making is the same way here, where it's, what's important to note is conscious intention. That's on one end of executive functioning. That's before executive functioning takes over. What's my conscious intention? And then behavior. That's on the other end of executive functioning. What do I end up doing? Mm-hmm. And so decision making in the sense of what do I think I should be doing, or what do I set as my conscious intention, is impacted by executive functioning, because all this stuff is. But generally that I would not call executive functioning. Executive functioning is the ability to control your behavior. Yeah. It's the hypothetical set of cognitive processes that allow a person to control their behavior. So deciding what I want is not an executive functioning thing, but that getting translated into the action necessary to make it happen is the executive functioning. So mostly people are saying, I intend to do this thing, and then I don't. And we say, oh, that's an initiation problem. But we're not talking about what you decided you should do.
Okay. So I have two options. I could go for job A or I could go for job B. And I don't apply for either. Or I'm afraid to pick one in case I miss out on the other. I think this is a common thing too. Well, if I do this, then this will happen, and this will happen, and then I won't get to do this or this or this or this. And you start to see all these sort of threads spreading out in front of you of possibilities, and then you just kind of get stuck, and you don't make it.
So back to like a more philosophical whatever, but I do want to do some actionable stuff. This I describe with people, it's like you're going down a river with infinite branching paths, and each of those branches has infinite branches off of each of them. So the fact that you're passing one does mean you don't get to go back and do any of those, but you still have infinite options in front of you, just not ones. Yeah. The reason that I talk about it as a river as opposed to a path or a thread or anything like that is, while you're trying to decide whether you want to go down a branch or not, you're still moving forward in the river. You don't get to choose not to bypass any of these opportunities. Literally every moment you are passing infinite opportunities that you don't have anymore, which can be very overwhelming. But in that case, I'm trying to make it so overwhelming that it breaks your desire to try and solve the puzzle, because it's not a solvable puzzle.
Yeah. So why not just choose the stream or whatever that appeals the most, the one that looks like could be fun to go this way?
Here's shorthand for decision making, and this is actionable. Unless you have reason to override it, which happens all the time, we have conscious reason to override it. Unless you have reason to override it, do what seems or feels most enjoyable. Just like pain is a message that humans have evolved the ability to feel pain. It's not a thing that exists. It's a signal that we get from our own experience, because we have learned that it is beneficial to our survival to avoid or change or address whatever thing is causing the pain. Enjoyment is the same thing, except the opposite. We have learned over generations, millions of years, right? Like, things which are enjoyable are things which theoretically are going to be beneficial for me. But like with pain, we override it all the time. If I'm diabetic and I prick my finger to test my blood sugar, that's beneficial for me. My body doesn't adjust for that. It still hurts, but I do it anyway because I can override it. Same thing with enjoyment. Sugar tastes good, but if I eat too much of it, it does this and this and that. So I override the desire to have more of it. But unless you have a conscious like actual reason to say this is why doing the less enjoyable thing would be better, default to doing the more enjoyable thing. That this is a specific thing that has messed up a lot of decision-making processes in our culture, is that people get taught that doing what you like is bad, that hard work brings success. The thing that you don't want to do is the thing that would be better for you to do, which can't be true, obviously, all the time, but it can't even theoretically be true, not even remotely close. The vast majority of the time, the thing that is most enjoyable to you is enjoyable. I like board games. Maybe you don't. Why is it enjoyable to me and not to you? Because there are a million different factors and experiences and biological qualities that are being taken into consideration as my body puts together my best impulse of what sounds fun. So absent everything else, default to what seems more fun or what is more fun, until you can come up with, sure, that one seems more fun, but this one pays a lot more money, which would be more fun because of what I can do because of the money than this one would be without the money.
Yeah.
So that's,
and even if it's harder to do in the beginning, if it feels like fun to you, you're going to want to do it more. So you'll practice. Right. You'll get better at the thing, and that will make it more fun.
And we change, right? Like things that weren't fun become fun. Everything you enjoy now, there was a point at which you didn't enjoy it before you knew how to do it or even knew it was a thing. Like babies don't enjoy knitting.
Just picturing a little toddler.
This is part of the limit philosophically about talking about decision making is, well, how do you make a decision that doesn't factor in that you're only presented with certain particular options, right? Like, so how can we say it's totally, or anyway. Yeah, we change, we evolve over time. So actually, one of the really ironic things, especially about ADHD people, is they'll say things like, I'm really impulsive. It's a problem. And I'll say, what do you mean give me an example of when you've been impulsive. Well, like I've been wanting to quit my job for 6 months, but I shouldn't. Did you quit your job? No, but I think about it all the time. That's the opposite of impulsive. Impulsive means I have an impulse and I follow through on it. I don't override it. I don't consider it, think it through. But we get taught these things that make us think we have the opposite of the problem we actually have. And one of those things is giving up or quitting. By far, the best way to approach attempting to become successful is quitting things that don't work as fast as you can. Mm-hmm. It is true that there are things that don't work, and if you keep at them, eventually they pay off. But it's also true that there are things that don't work, and no matter how long you keep at them, they will never pay off. How are you supposed to predict the future and know which one is which? And so neurodivergent people who tend to believe in rules means we tend to believe that other people, the things they're telling us about how it should be or what we're supposed to do, we tend to believe that. We tend to override our own experience. Like you were saying earlier, we'll frame that sometimes as, I don't care about what I want. That I'm doing this thing, I'm banging my head against the wall. It seems miserable. It's not paying off in any of the ways people say, but they say keep going at it. So I do and I do and I do. If you don't let yourself quit, like an actionable thing for parents, if you are trying to get your child to explore some stuff, right? You want them to take piano lessons and they're resistant to it, but you convince them to do it, which I'm not saying is a bad thing. I think that's an important thing that we all do for each other, not just parents and kids, but we say, hey, I think you might like this. People have a natural reaction of, I don't know it, and therefore I don't think it's worth my time unless we give them reason to explore it. Yeah. But if you convinced your kid to take those lessons, and then 3 weeks in, they say, no, I hate this, I don't want to do it anymore. And your response is, well, we paid for 3 months of lessons, so you can quit at the end of the 3 months, but you have to finish out the 3 months. Then guess what's going to happen the next time you try and get them to do something that they're not sure whether they want to do it or not? They're going to be a lot less likely and take a lot more convincing, because the last time they tried something that they didn't think they were going to like, it turned out they were right, and you made them do it for 3 months anyway. Whereas if you do it and after 3 weeks they hate it, and you say, okay, well, we tried it, let's quit. Then the next time you say, let's try this new thing, well, they now have evidence that when they try something new, if they don't like it, they don't have to keep doing it. So why not try a new thing? We do this backwards in our culture. Don't give up. Stick to it. Grit, determination, et cetera, et cetera. because we do this reverse analysis, involves a lot of like survivorship bias and whatever, where we look at successful outcomes and we say, well, those people stuck to what they were trying to do, but we're not evaluating all the people who stuck to what they were trying to do and it didn't work out. We're not factoring that in. And yes, most people who achieve great levels of success by whatever metric you're talking about are people who have done something consistently for a long period of time. That doesn't mean that doing something consistently for a long period of time does lead to success.
Yeah.
You
have to love it, or at least like it.
When you're overthinking decisions, a lot of that has to do with just you're not going to let yourself give up or quit if it turns out to be. If you say, what should I do with this thing? I could do this, this, or that. And you can quit and change your mind at any time, then it's pretty easy to say, I think of those, option 3 seems the best, let me try it. And if it doesn't work, oh, shoot, okay, let me try number 4. Or maybe I come up with a new option or whatever. But if I say, no, once I choose option 3, I have to follow through with it. Well, guess what? You're going to be thinking a long time before you do anything, including patterns that we then call procrastination or putting it off or whatever is, I am not sure that I want to do this all the way through or that it will work out all the way through. I've been using college and career comes up because these are important ones here where people are saying, like, even friends of mine who are very neurodiversity affirming people, will say like, well, I don't know, my kid doesn't know what he wants to do. To which I say, are you still doing what you chose to major in undergrad? And none of us are. So why are we treating it like it's something that you have to figure out when you're 15?
Yeah.
Why do we take kids and say, no, you don't know, you don't get to make decisions, blah, 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 until they're 17. And then we say, now you get to choose what you want to do for the rest of your life. But once you choose that, you have to do it. You can't give it up. It's like we didn't even scaffold them into that. It's just now you got to make the most important decision ever. And no one can tell you what to do about it, even though we've told you not to do anything without our input until now.
I still don't know what I want to be when I grow up. I'm 43, but I figure I've probably got another 30 years of working life ahead of me. So I still have time to figure it out.
Yeah, but you'll never figure it out.
No, I'm just going to try and enjoy it as I go.
Yes, you change. I did something that was really fun and then it wasn't fun, or I did something that was miserable, but I had no better options. And these are both true statements at different times of my life in terms of being able to afford the things that I needed to afford. And either way, you do it until you come up with something better or until things change so that it's no longer your best option or whatever. So
I think it's funny you mentioned impulsivity because I was thinking about this earlier today about this topic, about how somebody once told me that they thought my going back to college was yet another one of my pie in the sky ideas. And I was really taken aback by that because I always saw myself as somebody who stuck with something until the bitter end. I stuck around in jobs I hated, in relationships that were going nowhere, because this is what I should do. I should stick it out. It's hard now, but it'll get better later. And so to see that somebody else thought I had like a bunch of pie in the sky ideas, I saw that then as sort of a deficit or a defect in me. But now I see that actually it's kind of cool that I have a bunch of ideas, and some of them are going to go nowhere, and some of them are going to be a lot of fun to play around with.
Yeah. Ultimately, these are all language games.
Yeah.
Even sticking to it or goal-directed behavior or determination or whatever. Because if I say, oh, going to school, I don't want to give that up. Well, going to school wasn't your goal, right? You have some other goal. You determined that going to school was the best strategy to get there. Now, if we talk about grit the way that most people in our culture talk about it, don't stop doing what you're doing no matter how much it sucks. It's a lot more likely you're going to push past and ignore it, because literally any sign that this is unsustainable or difficult or exhausting or draining, you just write off and push past it. And that's noble. You're pushing until you burn out and don't get there. Or you can keep this goal, whatever it was, in mind, try the school thing, be like, nope, this isn't working, and give up on the tactic, come up with a different tactic to try and get to that same goal. And there are limits, right? There are some things where you have to meet certain requirements and that there's no workaround or whatever. But generally speaking, you're going to have a lot more success. It's like trees that bend in the wind instead of break, right? Like, this isn't working, let me try something else. That's not quitting. Or talking about people as being like flip-floppers or wishy-washy or whatever. Like, you should change when you become aware of new information. You should change. Like, who decided that this was your goal? 17-year-old you, and now you're 40-year-old you. Would you defer to the 17-year-old version of yourself in any other facet of your life? When you're making any other decision, would you say, I need to consult with 17-year-old me because they know way better than I do? No, you have new information. You know more. You should be changing. So quitting in that sense, the version of grit that people are talking about is once you've decided that you should do something, you can never get any information, including the fact that doing it is miserable and unsuccessful. No new information should dissuade you from that.
Mm-hmm.
But if you also look at the successful people, they just rebranded. It's a word game. We pivoted.
Yes. Yeah.
We responded to changes in the context and changes in the market. We anticipated upcoming trends and innovated. Like, change, you can't do something new unless you stop doing the old thing. You can't do it the same way and the new way at the same time. So it's just a matter of what people want to make it sound like. If they want to make it sound like you're giving up, they can. If they want to make it sound like you're innovating, same deal.
Yeah.
So back to decision making, because we got to wrap up, but some practical things that I didn't get to. This is what I always do, try and cram a bunch of stuff in.
We have one question in the chat as well.
Oh, yeah, go ahead. What was it?
I think it might be that we should pick it up next week. So it was somebody wondering if you have any thoughts or advice on supporting a child who's going through speech delay. Do you think maybe that's something we should pick up?
Great question. And yeah, let's address that another day, maybe even next week, talk about speech.
I'll make a note of that and we'll come back to it next week.
I can't cram it in here right now. But if you're struggling with decision making, two things that are generic but will help regardless of we can do more specific things for specific kinds. But number one, give yourself permission to quit. Say that whatever I end up deciding, if as I'm doing it, it turns out that it is going differently. This includes even planning, right? I'm going to do this thing at 7:00 tonight. Great. Only do that if you also say, and if 7:00 rolls around and I'm not doing it, then it means I just got to come up with a new plan.
Yeah.
If the morning version of me planned it for 7 and now it's 7 and I'm not doing it, I don't say, damn, the morning version of me knew more than I know about this moment and what would be best fit here and whatever is wrong with me. How did I become worse than the morning version of myself? I just say, okay, good guess, morning version of myself, good plan, didn't end up working out. Let me try a new guess.
Yeah.
And then you take in there. Anyway, so give yourself permission to quit. And that can look like contingency plans, right? Saying things like, okay, I'm going to do X. And if by day 5, I'm still exhausted, then I go back to the drawing board. Or I'm going to try Y. And if my spouse gets upset at me, then I'm going to change it or whatever. It's okay to experiment with these things. And then to pair that with, to try and like stop the overthinking problem that you're talking about, then just give yourself a limit. And it can be arbitrary. And to say, look, I can think about this for 20 minutes. At the end of 20 minutes, I call it the idea to beat. At the end of 20 minutes, whatever my best idea is, even though it is flawed, you will never come up with an idea that isn't flawed. Whatever my best idea is, I start doing it, which becomes really easy to do if you give yourself permission to quit, give up, pivot, innovate, whatever. Say, yeah, this isn't perfect, but I don't have a better idea. The idea to beat is a very helpful thing in this kind of decision making. What's my best idea? Now, every new idea I come up with gets compared to my best idea, not every other idea I have had.
I like that.
Just have one idea at a time. Apples to apples, 1-to-1 comparison. Another quick, easy, actionable rule. If you're comparing more than 2 options on more than 1 metric, make a grid.
Yes.
We can compare 2 things in one way mentally. These 2 options, which one, or we can compare 2 things in only one, or we compare more than 2 things in only one way mentally. Which of these people is the tallest? We're only looking at 1 metric. We can do that mentally. But if we're saying, okay, between a combination of height and weight, which of these people is most likely to be a good climber or whatever. You can't. Two things you can compare in two ways. If you're comparing in one way, you can do more than two. Anything more than that, write it down in a grid.
Yeah, this is where lists and spreadsheets come in handy. As dull as it sounds, it really does help.
Right? We should talk at some point about the 3 different purposes that kind of thing serves, because this isn't about helping you to make sure you knock all this stuff on a to-do list. It's about having information up front, like careers, college, those kinds of decisions. Where am I going to live? You want to be able to say, okay, well, this one has the best climate, but this one's the cheapest, but this one has the, like you need all of that. You can't hold it all. You just run in circles.
I think I showed you this before, but I have this little pad. And it says, should you say no? And it's just, you list the project at the top, and then you answer a bunch of yes, no questions in relation to the time you can give it. Will it help you gain skills or collaborate? Will you get paid for it? Do I really want to do it as there by itself? Could it lead to more opportunities? And you just write yes, no beside all of them. Count up the yeses and count up the nos. And it helps you break it down into, do I really want to do it?
The thing that I try to coach people on is just acknowledging that things have cost.
Yeah.
Because there are things that, I really want to do, really would lead to more opportunities. This is why to-do lists are problems, is because, I'll just add it to my to-do list. Why wouldn't I? Something new that might be valuable, let me add it. But then I look at my to-do list, think I'm supposed to do it all. If instead I just say, I add it to my to-do list, and I also add a numeric assignment of how much valuable it is and a numeric assignment of how costly it is, then all of a sudden it shifts very easily to, would I want to do this? Yes. Can I afford to do it? Not unless I give up this or that. Do I want to give up any of the other things above it? No. So it would be great and I'd love it. But so that I like that sheet. It's a nice shorthand way of just saying, like, remember that things are costly, and that just because they're valuable, even if for no other reason than because somebody else would want you to, that's valuable too. Just because it has value doesn't mean that you can do everything that has value.
Yeah.
You can't stop the stream and say, hold on, let me figure out which of these patterns are more valuable before I go anywhere. You're moving forward. You got to figure it out as you go.
So you may as well aim for the one that feels most enjoyable.
Yeah, try to do your best. You see a branching path. Okay, I can think about it until I'm there, but then I'm there. I just got to go. I can't stop.
Yeah.
Stopping just means you're going which way the river takes you instead of exerting any influence, which is fine too. Just, it doesn't mean that you haven't gone forward. Just
all right.
Relax. All of you are doing great. Doesn't matter. There are things you want to change, things you don't enjoy. Of course there are. And it is okay to want to change those things. It doesn't make you bad to want to change things about yourself or about your life. And it doesn't need to be justified to want to change those things by saying that you're a terrible person and therefore it's worth changing. You can just want to change it if you want to change it. There are things that are going on in your life that are just fine. It's things that are good. It doesn't take those ones away, but makes it easier to change the ones you want to change. Allow the ones that are good. I don't know what the hell I'm trying to say there. I'm just sermonizing, I guess, but I got to go.
All right. Yeah, we've gone a little bit over time. I think we started a little bit late too, but let you get back to work. And thanks for being here. And thanks for joining us in the chat. And see you next Monday.
Let's save that question and come back to it. Thank you all.
Take care. Have a good week.